I remember when I first found the Fresh and Fit podcast on YouTube. Back then, all the things being said, all the things being shouted very loudly were all groundbreaking to my 19-year-old brain. I thought I had found the truth. Like capital T, truth. I realized that I was pretty lucky in a few ways. I had about 6 months of, really being in that red pill rage space and just being angry at everything, being angry at women, all kinds of stuff, right? And then I just grew out of it. I didn't really do anything specifically to do that. When I started to pay more attention and when I started to let go of a lot of the anger that I was holding on to, it became very apparent that a lot of these takes, a lot of this information has some truth to it, but it's one-sided. And further than that, people are also making this kind of content in most situations, not because they actually want to help you, but because your anger is a really, really valuable thing to them, because it's easy to farm your emotions for views and clicks, right? And I remember in that time when I was angry, boy, did I watch a lot of those fucking podcasts and videos. I watched a lot of them, right? I spent hours and hours and hours going through videos and just consuming, right? So again, for me, I feel like I was fairly lucky because it took me about 6 months and I grew out of it, right? The truth became very apparent, which is that most of this isn't nuanced, most of this isn't well thought out, and a lot of it has very basic rebuttals as long as your emotions aren't clouding your judgment, right? Unfortunately, this is not the case for everyone. It's becoming more and more of a problem that men find the red pill and then get stuck there forever. They remain angry for years and years and years. They never work through their own bitterness, and they never manage to actually grow out of this kind of hateful mindset, right? I'm not saying red pill content is necessarily hateful or whatever, right? But I'm just saying it can be. There's definitely an element of, being very angry at women, being very angry at the world. And if you don't let go of that, it really can sour your entire life, right? It really can fuck a lot of stuff up for you. So instead of just making vague statements about the red pill and about its message, I'm going to actually dive into some shit, right? And I hope that if you are stuck in red pill rage mode, that you can let go of that and actually be free from it, right? Because anger doesn't actually hurt the person you're angry at, funnily enough, right? It doesn't. So if you are in this red pill space, this self-improvement space, your mental health probably isn't very good unless you've been in it for quite a while and you've overcome basically the topic of this whole video, in which case you can just click off. But if you're watching on, it means that you probably have a lot of anger. You probably have been through a lot of traumatic shit and your mental health isn't that great, right? So it makes it even more important for you to learn to let go and form a healthy relationship with your negative emotions and experiences. Because if you don't, people will keep you on the carousel of negative content, and they'll just continue to steal your time by virtue of the fact that you're so angry that you'll sit there and you'll just watch these videos for hours and hours and hours because it's validating the way that you feel, right? As soon as you learn to let go of that, the urge to watch these videos of people getting dunked on and women getting shouted at and all kinds of shit, it no longer does anything for you once you actually let go of this high level of anger, right? So if you are in this space because you have bad mental health, because you have a lot of bad experiences with, let's say, being rejected pretty harshly, or anything like that, maybe you've been cheated on a bunch of times in a relationship or whatever it is, right? it really is important that you learn to let go of this stuff. I'm not saying you have to right now, right? You don't have to right now. You're allowed to feel your anger. You're allowed to be angry, right? There are good things to be angry about, but not forever. That's not the state you want to be in forever. It's a growth period. It's a transition period that you can spend some time in, that it's necessary to spend some time in, but you don't want to stay there, right? It's not a good place to stay. The first really crucial realization to overcoming red pill rage is understanding that not everything that these people are saying is true. And the impression that you get of women and the world in general by watching these videos over and over and over, as opposed to going outside and talking to real people and forming real relationships, it's very different. One of the biggest things that I had a lot of anxiety about, a lot of like intrusive thoughts surrounding, was people perceiving me as creepy, especially around like kids and that sort of thing. Because I would see all these stories where it's like, you know, a guy takes his daughter to the park, like a dad takes his own daughter to the park and then gets arrested. Like someone calls the cops on him because they see it's like a man with a child, right? And they immediately just assume that he was like, you know, that he was like a criminal or a predator or something like that. And so that made me like so paranoid to ever, like if there was a kid nearby me, I would be so uncomfortable. Like even like nieces and nephews within my own family. Like it took me a year or so of being around them to not feel like incredibly like uncomfortable and like whatever, you know, because I had just been subverted basically into thinking of myself as like a threat or as like evil or as like gross and disgusting just for being a man, right? And that's also what these videos do, right? Is that they kind of like feed into a lot of these insecurities and complexes that we have, right? Yes, it's possible, right? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not even saying it's an unreasonable fear to have, right? But for me, it was so all encompassing and like so consuming from all of these like stories I had read. It was maladaptive, right? It was actually bad for me. And then one of the things that kind of like changed that was seeing how my dad's generation interacted with kids in general, even kids like in a mall or something where it's like, you know, we would take my niece to this train ride that was in like a mall, right? Literally a train that's actually kind of a car. It would just drive around in the mall and kids could pay like $20 and it would take you on like a lap of the place, right? And so we would take my niece to go and do that, and there would be other kids on like the different cars of the train, right? And so obviously because I'm babysitting with my dad, right? We would be on like the first car or whatever, and then there would be kids on the second car, and they would, you know, like talk to us a little bit and they'd whatever, and that like freaked me the fuck out, right? That was like terrifying. But then I just saw it's like, you know, so my dad and my uncle would just chat to them, make random conversation, and just ask them about whatever is like busy going on, you know, like do you like trains, do you whatever. And then even, you know, when the ride was over and all of the parents were kind of around to like collect their kids again from the train, then it's like, you know, my dad or like my uncles and stuff, like everyone, all the adults that were with us would just say like, would basically just give the parents a compliment and say, you know, your kid is very nice. It was so polite. They were like, you know, so joyful or whatever, something like that, right? And again, my brain is going crazy, like thinking that this is like some wild shit to say. Like I would never say this. I wouldn't be caught dead, like talking about a stranger's kid, giving a stranger's kid a compliment to the parents, right? Because I was so paranoid that like I'm just going to get locked up like right then and there. If I open my mouth, if I even acknowledge the fact that like they exist, right? But no, obviously that didn't happen, right? The parents were just like, appreciative. All parents love their kids very much, and they also love it when other people see that their kids are like nice kids and whatever. And it's like, even now, just when I'm saying these words, like it almost makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, because there's still like a level of paranoia that I hold, right? But that's what being chronically online does to you, right? Is that it can play off of what starts out as like a reasonable concern, right? And it can polarize it into like a traumatizingly like all-encompassing like phobia or fear, right? And that's what happens, in my opinion, a lot with the red pill space. So yeah, the biggest thing you have to realize is like not all of the impressions that you get online relate even remotely to reality, right? Like I even, on that same day with my niece, I even challenged myself to say like, hey, like to one of the parents to basically just give them a compliment about one of their kids, right? To prove to myself that nothing horrific was going to happen to me if I did that, right? And I did, and it made me extremely uncomfortable while doing it, and nothing bad happened. It's not to say that it's impossible for something bad to happen, but nothing bad happened when I did it, right? And probably most of the time, if you do something like that, nothing bad is going to happen. But that's not the impression you get at all from the online stories, from listening to them and all of that, right? So first and foremost, understand that if you're getting your main feedback about what's real and what's not real, and what's, and like the severity of things from being online, understand that it's incredibly misleading, right? Incredibly misleading. So that's step number one. You have to understand that. I would say step number two is learning to form a healthy relationship with your negative emotions. And this is like just fantastic advice in general, right? But especially when it comes to letting go of anger, people often wonder, it's like, how do you let go, right? How do you become free of fear? How do you become free of anger? How do you, how do you ascend above all of these things, right? The way that you do it is kind of the opposite of what everyone says, because it's not really that intuitive. Because we live in this culture of just constant distraction, right? And like constant outwards focused attention rather than inwards focused attention. The only way to let go of an emotion, right, is to experience it. Emotions are finite collections, right, of bodily and mental sensations. Mostly bodily, but there is a mental side to it. When you go through something negative and you don't allow yourself to kind of fully feel it, if you distract yourself away, let's say you had a bad day at work and you come home and immediately, you're on your phone or you're on your computer to play some video games or whatever. What you're doing, right, is you're trying to basically force that anxiety to go away because you don't like the way it feels. And what that does is it basically like stuffs it down and it puts it in a container in your subconscious mind. And this container doesn't stop affecting you, and it doesn't go away ever, right? Because you're not allowing it to come up and out, because that's what emotions want to do. They want to come up and then they want to leave, right? But you hold on to them very tightly by forcing them to like stay deep down. And so the way to let go of that is to basically allow yourself to sink into negative emotions, to allow yourself to sink into uncomfortable feelings, right? And people always have this concern where it's like, if I allow myself to feel this stuff, like, won't I just re-traumatize myself? It's like, no. The trauma that you have is comprised 100% of the emotions that you haven't let go of yet, right? So allowing yourself to feel all of this stuff is not going to re-traumatize you. It's not going to make you more angry, right? What it's going to do is allow the anger that's there, or the sadness that's there, it's going to allow that to come up and then run its course, and then you can be free of it afterwards, right? Now, if you habitually distract yourself, like a lot of people do, there's going to be a lot to come up, right? And you don't have to do it right now. You don't have to do it right away. You don't have to do it all at once, right? If things get too intense, you're allowed to take your mind off it until you feel grounded and secure again, right? But then dive back in when you feel ready to again, and do this over and over again. What you'll find is that each time you do it, there's less and less anger in the tank, right? There's less and less stuff to come up. Now, it's not going to immediately feel like that, because what's going to happen is that you'll have a lot of resistance to feeling these emotions, right? Like a subconscious resistance to allowing yourself to experience them. So maybe the first time you sort of meditate or journal on this, you'll feel like a little bit of anger come up. And then as you work through that resistance, you'll feel more and more, right? So it'll feel as if it's getting worse, but it's not getting worse. You're actually making fantastic progress every single time you do this. Now, you can share your emotions with other people if you want to, right? If you have people you trust, like 100% go for it. Just know that it's not necessary to externalize the emotion to let go of it, right? All you have to do is go through it yourself, right? You don't have to express it externally. You don't have to necessarily talk about it. You can, and if you have people you trust, you really can, right? You're allowed to make that decision, make an informed decision about that, but you don't have to. Just understand that it's not a crucial part of letting go, right? And the third key to all of this is understanding that logically, a lot of these arguments don't make a lot of sense, right? The red pill wants to paint life as exclusively difficult for men and exclusively easy for women, which is just not true, right? If you're a human being and you're alive, you're going to experience difficult things, right? Whether you're a man or a woman, and you can argue maybe that one has it worse than the other, but at the same time, that's not very productive, is it, right? Because it doesn't actually work to solving either set of issues. So don't have this idea that women just get handed everything in life and it's completely easy for them and they never go through any struggle, and you will only ever go through struggle because you're a man. It's not true, right? If you think about the current decisions that women have to make when it comes to relationships, when it comes to the world, it's not an easy place to be, right? Because on the one hand, you have the sort of mainstream feminist stuff that I personally think if you follow to a T, you're going to end up being kind of miserable, right? Because you're not doing things that are fundamentally fulfilling for people that are feminine at their core, right? So it's the whole mainstream advice is going to be, be a boss babe, go out there and get a career, and the fact that you can buy an extra purse by the time you're 55 is going to make you happy, versus having a family. They convince you that children are a burden, and they convince you that the only thing that matters is your career, right? Which is not good advice. It's not going to make you happy as a woman, right? Maybe it makes some women happy, women that are masculine to begin with, within, right? But I think for the majority of people, having a family, especially as a woman, is going to be one of the most fulfilling things you can do, right? Because relationships and love are very, very high, if not the number one priority for women. So you have this choice, which is difficult to make, right? Because you have to have a contrarian idea to the popular advice, and that contrarian idea has to be correct, and you have to work through the fact that you aren't going to be approved of on this contrarian idea by most people. It's the same thing with self-improvement, right? A lot of people will look at self-improvement and be like, it's actually kind of hopeless. Don't aim high because you'll just be disappointed. People in general have a lot of hopelessness to share because they themselves have given up on their dreams, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to relationship advice for women, right? So it's not just this easy breeze through life. You still have to make a very hard decision, which is the decision between modern values, right? That aren't likely to make you happy, but you don't know that because everyone is telling you it's going to make you happy. Or you have to be like really, really ahead of the curve. Maybe you had like very traditional parents. Maybe you had just good parents in general, good influences. And you get taught what I would say correct mindset to have, which is that your family is going to be number one priority and your career can kind of take a backseat towards that, right? But that's also difficult because at the same time that you are making the decision to be a traditional woman, like all of these red pill guys are saying they want, right? A lot of guys are making the decision to be non-traditional men. And that means that your chances of finding a guy who is going to be able to take care of you financially if you're not working and is going to have traditional values that they will uphold and they'll be good men and they won't take advantage of you. It's like, it's a difficult fucking thing to find, right? It's not an easy like mission to accomplish, right? So men and women have different problems, but men and women both have problems, right? Again, all of this arguing about who is it worse for is not going to help you personally get better, right? So even if you're correct, and let's say, yep, it's 100% worse for men all the time, right? Let's say that's right. That doesn't actually help you, right? All of that anger, all of that, hatred, all of that whatever towards the world, all of this wishing, it's not going to help. So when you're ready for something that is truly going to help you, learn to let go. Understand that you aren't the only one on earth with problems, and that women in some ways have it pretty rough too, and really engage on all of these points that you think are 100% true. Part of the red pill also tries to paint it as if women cheating on men is somehow worse or evil when compared to men cheating on women, which is somehow acceptable or okay in comparison, right? Again, if you just look more into this, it's like bullshit. There's a study that people cite all the time to say like, this is the correlation or the connection between like the body count that a woman has and her chances of getting divorced after 10 years of marriage, right? And it's like the more bodies you have, the higher that chance is, right? And that is true. That study is a real study. But what people neglect to mention is that it happens the same way for men, right? So men with higher body counts are also more likely to get divorced. But people conveniently leave that out, right? Because it's a nice way to absolve men of being disciplined with. So anyway, to recap action steps for this video. Firstly, look deeply into the arguments that you hold dear and that you hold as truth. Understand that there are two sides to every coin, and if you are exclusively on the red pill side, you are only looking at one side of the coin, right? There is other information out there contrary to what you currently believe that has valid reasoning behind it. Look and find that information, and when you do, develop a balanced and nuanced perspective on these issues that is different from the perspective you currently have, which is one-sided. Secondly, understand that your perceptions of everything is shaped extremely heavily by being chronically online. And when you step off and you go and talk to real people and you have real relationships, once that is something you manage to do, you will understand that a lot of these things are not cut and dry the way that the red pill likes to present them as, and that there is actually some level of, believe it or not, complexity and individuality to human beings, regardless of the fact that the red pill likes to paint it as if everyone down deep is just exactly the same, right? Everyone is going to behave this way. All women are going to just always be looking for a better guy, right? All women are just trying to take your money. All women are just trying to do X, Y, and Z, right? Don't get sucked into that. It's a bunch of bullshit. Pay attention closely. Thirdly, let go of your anger. Once you find that you're ready to do this, allow yourself to feel all of the sadness, all of the hurt that you haven't allowed yourself to feel in the past. Allow yourself to let go of this trauma, right? To dive back into the way that you felt when the traumatic thing happened to you, when the difficult stuff happened to you, and slowly but surely allow the emotion to come up. Breathe your way through it, meditate your way through it, journal your way through it, and eventually let go of it. With that being said, that's how I escaped from Red Bull rage, and I hope that you can escape too.